Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host, Kushalmehra. All right, time for the part 3 of our Turkic Invasions podcast with Abhijit Iyer. Abhijit, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me as always, Kushal. So, this entire series, it was so much fun. I think this is the last merely because, it became a series because of the Q&A within the comments on YouTube. Initially, it was just meant to be about the Turkic invasions. And then people didn't understand a lot of what was being said about horses because I tend to assume that what I know about horses, everybody else will know about horses. And excuse me, clearly that's not the case. So then the second part of this was, understanding the economics of the war horse. And then people wanted to know, what about Tarain? Or why did Odisha and Assam not fall for how did they manage to hold out so long? And why were the Mongols so successful if they controlled all the horse breeding lands and things like that? Why were they not so successful against these people? So that's basically the genesis of part 3. I think this is the last in the series, but if there is more interesting questions that come up, then we will do a part 4.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. The aim of the series when after the first part, when Abhijit and I had our chat, was that we need to make detailed presentations with data so that there is a record forever that if anybody wants to come up and reference this material and use this material as a place where they can go and cite it somewhere, this is the aim. So Abhi, do I put the presentation on the screen now?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so I'm going to put it on the screen now. All right, and I'm going to go to the first slide now. There you go. Tarain.
Right. So now what happens is, remember, because this is part 3, I'm going to give you a quick update on what we discussed in part 1 and 2. Primarily in part 1, what we discussed was that, in India and in the Western world today, the whole concept of slavery is seen as somehow something very horrible. That wasn't the case with Turkic society because slavery was your quickest way to social advancement in a sense. Think of it this way. In Turkic society, becoming a slave, if you were talented, was like clearing the UPSC and joining the IAS exam in modern day India. You're still a slave to the system in that sense, but you end up controlling the country. So that's kind of, it's never good to look at it in terms of the transatlantic slave trade, which is a very different cup of tea, number one. Number two, this was contrasted with a society that was ossifying, because if you look at the genetic record at this point, I think your other guest, Razib Khan, will tell you this. At some point in 500 AD, we see an absolute ossification of endogamy happening, which is when you have signs that the caste system is becoming rigid, which is why endogamy happens. Endogamy is when you're marrying within your own community, and those unique genetic strains, they become very, very clearly delineated. Mind you, we also discussed what were all the reasons that the Turks were militarily constantly. This was basically a social background. But you have to go check out that podcast on why the horse provided superiority and why India could never come back to the horse. And you have to watch those two to understand what I'm going to talk about now. Now, remember, we're talking about the first Battle of Tarain, which happens in around 1191, 1192. Officially, it's 1191. They say it might have actually been 1192. Now, what happens here is, the Indian side is infantry heavy. This should be a good thing because you're playing to your strengths, right? And the Turkic are cavalry heavy. They're almost 15,000 troops officially. We know for a fact that, these numbers, 15,000 horses versus 50,000 men, were probably highly unlikely in that period. The armies must have been much smaller when, we know generally production drops. There is a general de-urbanization that's happened globally and things like that. So it's clearly all of these numbers are exaggerated. But what we know is the Indians that is to say Prithviraj Chauhan, had a 4:1 numerical superiority to the Turks. What was equally surprising out here, which can be, of course, fatal, is that when Muhammad Ghori orders his frontal attack, he's basically asking his cavalry, his mounted archers, to go pepper the formations, the Indian formations, with bows and arrows and things like that. What happens is, we still don't know if they were ordered or it was just a general forward movement. The entire Indian infantry starts moving fast very quickly, and they smash into the Turkic troops. And like we've discussed in the horse video, in the face of a concerted and determined infantry charge, no cavalry charge has ever realistically succeeded. And that is what happens out here. And so what happens is, the Indians get into a close combat where Indian metallurgy is far superior. But remember, even in this battle, the fissures were beginning to emerge. You could see that even though both were essentially feudal militaries, the Ghurid army had been constantly training under command. The levies, it was a war economy. It was a permanent state of war. So they were highly disciplined, trained, unified command and things like that. On the Indian side, they were not. And when the Turkish line breaks, remember, maximum casualties, like we discussed in the previous video, maximum casualties happen when the line is broken and the defeated army is retreating. That is when you go after them and kill large numbers of them. That doesn't happen out here. They are defeated, they flee, but they mostly get away. Now, there's this big talk about, Ghori came and tried to kill Prithviraj, and Prithviraj injured him very badly with a spear. His upper right arm was injured or something like that, very badly. All of that is fine, but it doesn't make a difference. Now, what happens is, unlike India, Ghori learns his lessons. He's very, very bitter about what's happened. Mind you, why is he bitter about this? Because just previous year, he had come and invaded Gujarat. The Solankis out there had thrashed the living daylights out of him because they lured him into a trap near Mount Abu, where cavalry was useless. You were in a narrow ravine, so it was literally like Thermopylae. He walked them, the Solanki king walked them into a narrow ravine where cavalry was completely useless, and he crushed them out there. Here, it was an open battlefield that played to cavalry's strengths, and still he loses, but he learns his lesson. He learns several things. The first thing we know he learns is how disparate, because these are all tiny little rajas coming and fighting under a maharaja. Each one has independent command of his own unit and things like that. He learns this very well. He learns that the one thing he has to avoid is this close melee combat, because cavalry and archery combat depend on distance, on keeping you away. They are sitting and thinking about what to do for a whole year, and he is constantly on fixing mode. Now, mind you, this battle was actually a pretty close call, but Prithviraj Chauhan isn't learning any lessons, right? Now, the border at this point of time was somewhere around Bhatinda. It was part of Bhatinda, north of Bhatinda towards Lahore, was part of the Ghaznavi Empire, which the Ghurids then absorbed. And Bhatinda was one of the major frontier forts. Now, the first time round during this first battle of Tarain, Ghori captures it in the space of a month or so.
Okay.
It takes, now between the first and second battle, Prithviraj Chauhan's army takes a whole year to retake their own fort, in spite of starving out the garrison and everything. 2 weeks after they take the fort back, that is to say 1 year after the first battle of Tarain, they take the fort back. 2 weeks after that, Ghori invades again. And he captures the fort in the space of a week, like that. So what takes Indian troops a whole year takes Ghori again just 1 week to capture again. It took him a month the first time. So think about this. This is the power differential we're talking about. There's clearly lessons to be learned out here. First time he takes it in a month. Indian troops take a whole year. Second time, he takes it in a week. Literally 2 weeks after the Indian troops have captured the fort. Okay. So there's obviously none of this is being looked into by Prithviraj Chauhan. There is no post-battle introspection done. It's the same thing all over again, exact same battle formation. He doesn't even change battle formation to confuse the enemy. Okay. But what happens out here is it's very curious. When they set up camp, the superiority is now reduced because Ghori has brought more troops. It's a 2:1 superiority now. Indians 2, Turks 1. So what happens here is he pretends to be very scared, Ghori. And he says, boss, let me talk to my elder brother, who's also my... there were two rulers at the time. They were co-rulers of the Ghurid Empire, Muzuddin and Ghyasuddin. So he said, let me talk to my brother and see what we can do. I'm sure we can come to an accommodation. Okay. Curiously, at this point, our man Prithviraj Chauhan, his entire encampment, they're sleeping. No sentries, nothing. They're just sleeping. Okay. And so what happens is they launch a night attack. Mind you, for those of you, and there's a lot of comments that come in saying, oh, this was valor, this was ethos, this was bravery, it was cowardice. Tell me, bhai, what happened in Mahabharata? In the Mahabharata, Krishna hides the sun so that, he creates the solar eclipse so that somebody can be killed, because I forget the warrior's name, but somebody is, meant to be vulnerable when it is night. I forget what the name of that character is. So I don't know where this thing comes from. This is something, say, no Roman or Greek legion would have ever done. The Roman legion, whenever it camped, it would build a fort every single night. It would create defenses, basic defenses around and post sentries. If they were not on guard, they were executed. Nothing is happening out here. It's all left open, no sentries. These guys come and they wreak havoc. Irrespective, Prithviraj Chauhan manages to rally his troops and they form up in the battle the same way they had formed up the first time round. So at this point, this man knows, Ghori knows exactly what's going to happen. Because it's just a replay. It's like a bad dream come true again. And what he does is he keeps his troops very mobile. He doesn't want this Indian infantry coming charging him up. So he keeps the distance a lot more. And he starts sending his cavalry to go on peppering them with arrows. This time, surprisingly, Prithviraj Chauhan does not order a general attack. He's not ordering his troops to move forward. The whole day, and we suspect this is because of the horrific losses they suffered during the night attack. Something has clearly happened in the Indian camp that they don't feel they've got the momentum to push forward. The whole day, these horse archers keep coming and they're inflicting massive damage. Now, remember, the first time when it was done in the first Battle of Tarain, clearly the formations held. Now, those of you who have seen Vikings or have seen any Roman movies, that's called the Roman testudo, or in case of the Vikings, it's called the shield wall and things like that. It's a similar formation that every army uses to protect yourself against arrows. Now, it held just fine in the first battle. Why does it fail so miserably in the second battle? We don't know. We have no accounts for it, except that it fails and the casualties from the horse archers attacking is quite severe. Okay, we suspect it's because they're doing flanking movements and these guys aren't able to, because of their reduced numbers, they're not able to reorient, or there's too much confusion. There's basically too much confusion in the Indian camp at this point. That's the safest assumption, right? And very surprisingly, by mid-afternoon, around 2 to 3 p.m., because this is a feudal army, many of the deputy rajas in charge of different flanks, they can't take it anymore and they start abandoning. They start withdrawing and they start running away. And what happens is the center of the line gets weakened. So if this is the line, the center here is getting weakened. And this is exactly the moment that Ghori has been waiting for. So this time he replays what Prithviraj Chauhan did in the first thing. He doesn't send his cavalry. He sends his lancers, his spear-equipped infantry to charge the center of the line. The line breaks in two and there's a double envelope that happens. As in it's like this. They charge.
So they go in two
it
separate
breaks,
directions. Does that
and
mean?
then it becomes into and then encirclement, and there is a
Okay.
general slaughter. And in spite of what Prithvi Raja Raso tells you, there was no, he wasn't taken off and blinded and all of that. He was killed on the field. The orders had already been given. It was very clear he had to be executed, and that was it. Now, the very curious thing is, and nobody wants to talk about this, there is no second resistance. There is no redundancy. Notice the pattern out here. A few hundred years later, Battle of Talikota, all is gambled on one battle. And when that battle is lost, everything is lost. The same thing happens here. All is gambled on one battle. When one thing is lost, everything is lost. And mind you, this is the one thing people do not want to talk about. Prithviraj Chauhan's son is installed as the king by Muhammad Ghori. He becomes the puppet of Muhammad Ghori. Ultimately, he's removed. Yeah. And people don't like talking about this, see, because it hurts their sense of pride and valor and all that nonsense. But we know this. We know this because there's historical records to show you this. Right. So this is what happens in this battle. It's a very clear case of bad leadership, being stunned at night, not doing reconnaissance, not taking due diligence and things like that. Overconfidence, I guess. So this doesn't actually make it a pattern. If you remember in the last two podcasts, we've talked about a pattern. This one, you can say initially is a freak accident. The problem is what happens after this. So to look at the pattern, you have to go back to podcast number 1. But all of you asked about the Battle of Tarain. So I'm specifically only explaining the Battle of Tarain. If you want the larger macro context, go to that. Now, next slide, please.
Here you go.
Now we're fast forwarding about 15-20 years. And many of you asked if Turkic cavalry was so good and all of that, and if the economics of horsing and all of this are true, why is it that the Mongols did not manage to capture India? Right? Very important question. So again, you have to look at several different things of what is happening out here. This is the timeline. So if you look, I'm sorry, this is the best I could do in PowerPoint. This is an approximate timeline of what you're looking at in terms of from Tarain to Iltutmish. Tarain happens in around 1192, the second battle, and the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate. Mind you, the Delhi Sultanate is actually established a while later, because initially it's Prithviraj Chauhan's son who is made the puppet, who's made Ghori's puppet in Delhi. What happens here is Delhi or Ajmer, I forget where, but anyway, he's made the puppet. But what happens here is the whole of Turkestan, which is to say modern day southern Kazakhstan, the whole of Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, northern Afghanistan and northern Iran are at this point being devastated by Genghis Khan. Okay, there is a massive outflow of Turkish soldiers and troops fleeing the Mongols coming into Delhi at this point. And they are being given refuge in Delhi as long as they come individually. Because what happens is at this point, Genghis Khan is doing his destruction of the Khwarezm Empire in Iran. It's basically Iran plus Uzbekistan plus Turkmenistan today. And the king of that place, the Khwarezm Shah, is killed. His son Jalaluddin Mingburnu actually comes into India. Iltutmish does nothing to stop him. Even though Mingburnu is coming into his territory, the first thing Iltutmish does when he realizes what is imminent is he moves his capital from Lahore to Delhi. Okay, he moves his capital from Lahore to Delhi, and this is when we suspect that Prithviraj Chauhan's son was either killed or removed from the throne. We don't know what happens to him because there is no historical record of him after this. But Jalaluddin Mingburnu, people don't realize this, defeats the Mongols in a battle called the Battle of the Indus. There are two battles actually. Genghis Khan wins the second one. The Battle of the Indus is won by Genghis Khan, but people don't realize this. But Genghis Khan actually comes into India proper as we understand it.
Mhm.
Okay, he's definitely seen the Indus at some point. He did come into India. But it is to defeat Jalaluddin Mingburnu, who he defeats comprehensively. Jalaluddin Mingburnu had inflicted a small defeat on him prior. Now Genghis Khan is really upset. He comes and destroys this guy. And then he goes away after destroying him. Okay, now remember, even here, the destruction of Persia isn't complete, just as the conquest of China is not complete. So Genghis has many different things to do at this point of time. He has to finish the conquest of China, he has to finish the conquest of Persia, because even though he's devastated Persia, Persia actually rebounds. Within about 5 to 10 years, Persia rebounds and Jalaluddin Mingburnu comes back to power in Persia. He's trying to re-establish the Khwarezmian Empire. So you look down this timeline, what's happening is Ogadai, who's the next Khan of the Mongol Empire, is still
Yeah.
involved in subduing both Persia and northern Jin China. Okay, and this is also, mind you, when Ogadai dies, this is really the beginning of the end. So you see that big thick line I've put between Ogadai and Guyuk?
Yeah.
Well, it's a double line. That's a very important line that you need to remember what happens here. Because there's a 5-year interregnum during which Ogadai's wife, Torjane Khatun, becomes the regent of the empire. And she is hated by everyone. Nobody likes her. And the way the Mongol parliament is called the Kurultai, they all have to, it doesn't matter if Genghis Khan has nominated, see, Genghis Khan actually nominated Ogadai to be his successor. Even though Mongol custom was that his youngest son Tolui should take over. So Tolui actually reigns between Genghis and Ogadai. Tolui reigns as regent till all the generals and all the tribal chieftains meet again in the Mongol temporary capital at Karakum. And they then decide to elect Ogadai the emperor as per the wishes of Genghis Khan. So it was still an elective monarchy. Every time a great Khan called a Khagan died, everybody had to come back all the way. It didn't matter if they were 5, 7, 10,000 kilometers away. They had to travel all the way back for the election. That was the custom. So remember, in each Khan's death, you lost between 2 to 5 years of campaigning time because it required years for you to go back and then years for you to come back and reorganize your army and things like that. There was also this entire thing. Now, Ogadai is busy with Persia and the Jin Empire. Torjane's rule, that 5-year rule in between, that thick line between Ogadai and Guyuk, very important period because a lot of infighting starts off at this point. To such an extent that, when Genghis dies, there are 5 subdivisions of the empire. Come to the next slide. I'll show you the 5 subdivisions.
All right. I'll go to the next slide.
These are the general. This becomes formalized after Mongke Khan's death, who's the next emperor. But this is generally the kind of division you're seeing at this point. It's sort of a division of powers between the sons of Genghis. Okay, let's go back to the previous slide.
Okay.
Okay, and Guyuk at this point, who is the emperor somewhere in Karakum. Come to the next slide, I'll show you.
All right. You want me to go to the next one again? All right.
Go back to the next one. Okay, so if you see Karakoram on the top, before the Khanate of the great Khan Yuan dynasty in China.
Yeah. Here.
Can you point? Yeah, exactly. Just circle, just keep moving around there so that people can see. Move your mouse around.
That cursor disappears.
Yeah, okay. So that Karakoram is where the capital is. That's the traditional capital where they're meant to meet in the Kurultai. This is where Guyuk is sitting. And Batu Khan is the nominal chief of what later on becomes the Golden Horde, which you can see marked in gold.
Okay.
Or yellow or
Khanate
whatever it
of
is.
the Golden Horde.
Right. Now remember, this man Batu Khan, he is right now campaigning against Moscow and Kiev. So even for him to come all the way from there to Karakoram takes between 1.5 years to 2 years. Guyuk now is very, very jealous of Batu Khan and he has basically decided to kill Batu Khan. Batu Khan knows this. But he's summoned to Karakoram and Batu Khan decides to take a large army with him, which people consider to be a rebellion. We don't know because the fight never happens because Guyuk Khan just dies. He dies in about 2 years' time. We don't know how it happens. He dies. But the war between these two does not happen, but it was probably imminent at this point of time. So you can already see the kind of divisions that are happening. So the next Khan who comes up is Möngke Khan. Now, Möngke Khan is the elder brother of Kublai Khan. Okay, and he is very busy. Now, if you come to China again, come down to Kaifeng in the center. Can you see Kaifeng? Yeah, there. That is Kaifeng. So this is part of the Jin dynasty. Remember, China at this part is divided into north and south. The north is the Jin dynasty. The south is the Song dynasty. Now, the Song is the highest period of development that China has ever had. They had paper currency. They had, civil service exams. They even had a pension system for old people. They had a social service system. They had free hospitals for the poor and the old and things like that. It was truly the beginning of an advanced society. And yet, for some reason, the Song are hated in all Chinese books today, probably because they were too democratic for their own good. And yet, remarkably, the conquest of the Song Empire, which is to say south of Kaifeng, is the longest and bloodiest campaign that the Mongols ever undertake. So if you read any book on Kublai Khan, it will show you that this campaign against the southern Song, it cost the lives of 11 Mongol princes, including the life of the great Khan. So Möngke Khan was the only Khan to be killed in battle.
Okay.
The Song troops killed him during a siege of Diaoyu Island. And what happens is, all the resources, he was the last Khan to wield power across this entire expanse, right? He literally had the chaps ruling. By this time, Hulagu was in charge of the Ilkhanate, that is to say the purple area where you see Persia and Iran and all of that.
Okay.
He orders troops and catapults. Now remember, Chinese catapults were old Roman-style catapults. The Ilkhanate, because of its interaction with the West, with Crusader Europe, because remember, the Crusaders have occupied Jerusalem by this time, they had these massive counterbalance trebuchets, which are extremely high-powered catapults, which they did not have in China, which for the first time get introduced to China. So, this is the benefits of having a global empire, that within 2 years, he gets in all these engineers, these Persian and captured Christian engineers over to China, and they engineer these walls. And in a very, very bloody campaign, Kublai finally takes the Song capital after about 15, 20 years of constant warfare. So understand what is happening out here by this time. Go back to the previous slide.
Okay, wait. Let me go back again. All right, there.
So understand, Genghis is when the Mongol invasions are their worst, Genghis and Ogaday. After that, there is a constant period of instability and the Mongols getting bogged down in campaigns. The Mongols weren't winning the way we think they were winning in, always victorious kind of thing. There were serious setbacks in Persia. There were serious setbacks in China as well. And this is when Möngke is dealing with the Song and things like that. So remember, they are in serious turmoil. And this is also in 1260. Now, Balban ascends the throne sometime in 1261, 62 or 66, I forget. But in 1259 is the first macro-strategic defeat of the Mongols in the Battle of Ain Jalut, which if you go to the next map, next slide, we'll keep doing two fro with these two slides.
No problem. Yeah, I'll go back.
Come to the next slide. I want you to look at the western end where it says Baghdad. By this point, Baghdad has been sacked. The caliph has been killed. The caliph was rolled up in carpets and he was trampled by horses because the Mongols believed that royal blood was sacred and it should not be exposed to the sky god. So if you were crushed by horses in a carpet, if the sky did not see your blood, then the sky would not be upset. So Baghdad falls, everyone massacred. Somewhere near Acre, where you can see Acre on the Mediterranean coast.
Yeah,
there, somewhere near that, there's a battle of Ain Jalut. Ain Jalut means the well of Goliath. Jalut is Goliath. David and Goliath, the story from the Bible. So it's the well of Goliath, the spring or the oasis of Goliath, Ain Jalut. There's a huge defeat of the Mongols. The thing is, maybe the Mongols could have come back and taken revenge. They did not. That is why it is considered a macro-strategic defeat of the Mongols. So understand what is happening at this period. They are bogged down in the south of China. They are bogged down in the west and the east. And in the north also, their campaigns are fraying at this point of time. And they have only just now established their control over Persia permanently. And even before proper control is established, the empire starts collapsing. So go back to the previous slide.
Here.
In 1257 or 59, when Mongke dies, Mongke is the true last great Khan of the empire. After this, all central authority disappears. Kubla, his brother who succeeded him, was Khan only in name. He was not, nobody else listened to him. And this is where the division of the empire starts. Okay, so this is where Balban takes over. Now, why is it that in Balban's period is when we actually see Mongol invasion starting again? It's very important to understand that there was no Mongol invasion. So now we know why invasions did not take place between Ogaday and Mongke, because we've seen that they were occupied in different parts. Right? They were occupied in Persia, they were occupied in China, they were occupied all across this thing. The moment Mongke dies, a civil war breaks out. Right? Come to the next slide.
Okay. Wait. Here.
Now, the civil war, first, the empire fragments. At this point, these divisions become permanent. Okay, these are the 5 sons. So the Toluid, that says Tolui's children get this side. So basically 5 sons of Genghis Khan, each one empire inherits a certain part, the grandchildren really. They inherit a certain part of the empire. And this now becomes established. At this point, what is happening is, in 1258, when Baghdad is sacked, the ruler of the Golden Horde, he is converted to Islam.
It happens at this stage.
It happens very rapidly. It happens within 40 to 50 years of the death of Genghis Khan. The conversions, not 40, 50, 30, 40 years after the death of Genghis Khan, his children and his grandchildren have started converting to Islam.
Got it.
And the ruler of the Golden Horde is so upset that Hulagu, who is the Ilkhan, which is to say gold versus purple, gold on top, purple below, is so upset at what Hulagu does, he starts a war against his own cousin. Meanwhile, what is happening is that there's a Toluid civil war going on in China. Kubla Khan is opposed by several people, by his brother, his own brother Arik Boke, who wants to become the this thing, and the Chagatai Khanate, the ruler of the Chagatai, Kaidu, he doesn't want to be, he doesn't want Kubla Khan to become the great Khan. So Kubla Khan assumed the title of great Khan, Khagan, which is to say, Rajaon ka Raja, Raja di Raja or Maharaja or whatever, or Chakravarti Samrat, whatever you want to call him. He doesn't want him to get that title. So he is fighting Kubla Khan. So now, if you look at it, gold is fighting purple, blue is fighting red, red is fighting red. It's a full-blown civil war happening. It starts around 1260, 65-ish. It goes on till about 1305, 1306. It's a near constant civil war happening between the Mongol princes themselves. Now, go back to the previous slide again.
Okay. Here.
It is in this context that you have to see that everything that is described as the Mongol invasion of India happens at this point, be it Balban, be it Alauddin Khilji. There was no serious Mongol raid on India precisely for all the reasons that I have listed out to you. Okay, there were raids into India, and they were very, very serious raids. Remember, when they wanted, the Mongols could really teach these people a lesson in spite of the fact. Now, see that yellow line there in between that I've shown you? This is where we have a constant stream of Turkic troops. The yellow line in between. See this yellow line? This is the time period starting from the early reign of Iltutmish, when Genghis Khan is wreaking havoc. that because of constant war in Central Asia, Turks are pouring into India in massive numbers.
Mm-hmm.
There's an absolutely huge number of people coming, and they're coming with their horses, mind you. So you remember
Mm-hmm.
all the things we talk about, the horse not being suited to India. They're replenishing the stocks free of cost without any outflow of money from the exchequer. But it is still not enough because of the same reasons that we spoke about. But remember, at this point, the Mongol Empire, what we call Mongols, they are not able to command. Next slide, please.
All right.
Remember, when we say Mongol Empire up to Iltutmish, Genghis
Mm-hmm.
Khan could command all the horses of this entire region.
Okay.
No more. Now a division has
Mm.
happened. The Chagatai Khanate can only command horses from the Chagatai Khanate. That's it. The Il Khanate can only command horses from the Il Khanate. And as we've seen, the production of Persia is less, that is to say, of the purple area, is less than the horse production and sustenance capability of the blue area, whose production is again significantly less than that of the northern red area. Right? So you're dealing with a fragmented empire now that simply does not have that capability for sustaining. And mind you, horses have to be bred and trained over a period of time. Once you lose them in large numbers, it takes you 10, 15 years to replenish stocks and things like that.
Got it.
Because remember, if your horses have run away and died and things like that, they need to be bred, trained, everything like that. And you have to come up in large numbers and things like that. You have to prevent inbreeding and things like that. So it takes a very long time to stock it up. So you have to take all these things into consideration. That is why they did not launch a full-blown raid on India. But mind you, let's go back to the previous slide.
Okay.
So division and civil war is when the two strongest emperors of the Delhi Sultanate are dealing with the Mongols, the so-called Mongol invasions, which were not Mongol invasions. Stop calling them Mongol invasions because they were technically Chagatai invasions. Okay, and even the Chagatai Khanate at this time had split. So even there, we were seeing a further fractured invasion happening, where the Indian sultanates had already got a massive infusion of troops, horses, and treasure from Central Asia that had been brought in by Turks running away from Central Asia. Okay. Next, when the Mongols wanted, they inflicted massive defeats. Balban's own son was killed by the Mongols. Okay. Alauddin Khilji was besieged twice in Delhi. Remember, the Mongols came to Delhi. Never forget they came to Delhi. They didn't sack Delhi, but they sacked and burnt the entire outskirts of Delhi.
Got it.
Right. Now, if you go back to the previous slide, we need to understand which part of the Mongols was doing this.
This one.
Sorry, next slide. This one. So if you look at the Indian border, west of Srinagar, you see there's two borders here, the Il Khanate and the Chagatai Khanate.
Yeah,
the Il Khanate was too busy in the west. The blue and the purple. So it was mostly the Chagatai who were interested in India, but they had a very peculiar situation. There was this bunch of Turks called the Nokuderis or the Karaunas.
Okay.
They were essentially owed their loyalty to the Golden Horde because they'd all Islamized by this time. But they were under Hulegu Khan's control in a sense. So he never trusted them. Right? And it was this Karaunas who settled in northern Afghanistan. So they crossed over from the Il Khanate to the Chagatai Khanate. So from purple to blue. You see that big blue peninsula to the southwest of Srinagar. That is kind of where they settled down. And what happens is, it is mostly these people who are mistrusted both by Turks and Mongols who are charged with invading India because everybody is busy with their own wars. The Chagatai Khanate is busy fighting the Yuan dynasty, which is to say the Mongol Yuan dynasty in China. The Il Khanate is busy fighting to the west. So it is the Nokuderis who are left in charge of this frontier. And they themselves are in a position of suspicion because they don't know when their own local leader is going to get executed by either the Chagatai Khan or the Il Khan. Because remember, at this point, the Il Khanate is fighting the Golden Horde because the Il Khanate executed the Caliph, and the ruler of the Golden Horde, because he was a Muslim, took it very, very seriously. So understand what is happening. You're looking at fractured power. There's still an extremely dangerous force. They come to Delhi. They actually come to Delhi. If you go to Siri Fort, where Siri Fort Auditorium is, just under Siri Fort, if you go down August Kranti Road in Delhi, you can see the ruins of Siri Fort. It's not a very well-built fort. If you go to Tughlakabad and look at Tughlakabad, you see Tughlakabad is a far, far more advanced and sophisticated military fort than Siri Fort is at this point of time. Right? Siri Fort is a very altu faltu kind of it's shoddy construction, it's primitive shoddy construction, but it shows you that the Mongols really, if they wanted to expend time and money, you just need to go look at Siri Fort and you can see that they would have pulled it down in no time at all.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they would have pulled it down in no time if they had expended resources, which shows you that they weren't interested in conquest. They were just coming here to raid and take away plunder. That was it.
Okay.
So at no point of time where we purposefully, so never say the Mongols failed in their invasion of India or that the Turks successfully managed to defeat. They did not manage to defeat. They were at best dealing with not even the B team of the Mongol army. They were dealing with the C team of a divided Mongol army, which still managed to kill a lot of important generals, inflict a lot of defeats on India, and came right up to, they sacked and burnt Lahore, killed all its population, and came all the way up to Delhi. Okay, so let's not pretend that we defeated the Mongols. We did not. Because from this point on, I'm referring to Turks as we because, well, it's the Delhi Sultanate. Okay. So this is the story of the Mongols and the Turks. So you will see the pattern we were talking about, that even when Turkic dynasties come to India, they get weakened, they get Indified. And this classic Indian problem of lacking horse troops, the weakness of lacking cavalry, begins to set in with all of them in spite of getting reinforcements from Central Asian refugees.
Got it.
Okay, we'll see this, we'll keep seeing this pattern repeat over and over and over again throughout history. Okay, now if you go back to the previous slide now, so this is where Alauddin Khilji ends, and it is somewhere during Alauddin Khilji's reign that the Mongol invasions finally stopped. That is to say, not Mongol invasions, but the occasional raids by one fraction of the divided Mongol empire, they finally stop happening big time. Though technically the last Mongol invasion, if you look at it, is Timur Leng, because Timur Leng, if you go to the next slide, is technically the Amir of the Chagatai Khanate. Remember, Timur never declares himself Sultan. He is serving under the Chagatai Khan. And isn't it surprising that Timur is the one that goes and destroys the Golden Horde? He kills the king of the Khan of the Golden Horde is a guy called Tokhtamish. He kills Tokhtamish, he destroys the Golden Horde. So it is the Chagatai Khanate, who's Amir, who's prime minister, if you want to call it that, Timur, who destroys the Golden Horde and comes and sacks Delhi. And that's a very famous sack of Delhi that we've all read about how it killed. But mind you, it was nothing new for the Mongols. They already know what to do, because they've already come to Delhi 2-3 times before. Mind you, they came to Delhi not once under Alauddin Khilji. They came twice under Alauddin Khilji. They did not manage to come under Balban simply because they weren't interested. They were just doing, they were in a state of civil war at that point, and they were in no position to mount a invasion at this point. Okay, so this is the story of the Mongol invasions. So again, don't fall for all the nonsense that you hear written. You just need to do a little bit of comparative history to get down to what the crux of the matter was. Now we're going to talk about the two other parts. Why is it that if the Turks were so wildly successful in the Indo-Gangetic plains, why did they fail so spectacularly in Assam and Odisha? So here I want you to go to the next slide now. Okay, so these are the two topographic maps of India that I want you to see. Now, there are many topographic maps available. I chose this because this is the best representation. I want you to see first the blue circle, sorry, the blue square. That is Odisha. And I want you to notice that in addition to Tamil Nadu in the deep south, this is where the mountains of the Vindhyas are the highest. You literally go up to the hills on Simlipal and things like that in Odisha. You will literally have alpine climate even in peak summer. In my infamous helicopter trip of Odisha, which is now the stuff of legends, I actually flew over a lot of these areas, which is why it struck me that the image we have of Odisha as being largely plains is simply not true. It is actually an extremely mountainous territory, and you can see it from this topographic map how much of the state of Odisha is actually mountains, and they're actually very steep, impenetrable mountains. Which is why tribals like the Kol and people like that continue to live there completely unmolested for a very long period of time. And even now, their genetic makeup is very different from the rest of India. The mixing you see that happens in the rest of India does not happen with the Kol tribals out here. So first look at the topography here, then look at the little pink circle on top. That's Assam. And you can see what's happening out there. It's literally like a U curve, right? It's a trap waiting to happen. Now, by itself, the one thing you should know is one is a plain, one is a mountain. So what's happening out here? And this starts to make sense when you come to the next map, which is the water table map of India. Okay. Now I've superimposed these same two squares to the same areas. Now you see the blue areas, the deep blue areas, that is where the water collection is the highest. The water is heavily saturated into the soil. It makes the movement of horses and elephants and things like that virtually impossible. You cannot take heavy anything here. It is not suited for horse warfare. It is not suited for any kind of heavy warfare. You can only do infantry troops at best. Number one. Number two, a helicopter trip. When you fly over Odisha, you realize the extent of the water logging out there. It almost feels as the entire state, there is not a single dry patch to be seen. Even cities like Bhubaneswar and Cuttack are like Venice. You look around them when you're up in the air, you just see that they're artificially made out of some, the whole state essentially looks like a rice paddy with fairly deep water. Right? And what else is happening out here is if you see all the roads built to individual villages, the kinds and things like that is enormous. That shows you the extent of how weak the soil is in supporting anything heavy like horses and things like that. So imagine the entire state of Odisha is off limits to you for horses, which is your only military advantage, as is the entire state of Assam. Now, if you look at it, that's the Brahmaputra Valley. First, you're trapped on all sides. So it's perfect for jungle warfare where you can just slither into the mountains. And second, look at the water logging out there, because we know the Brahmaputra is the mightiest, it's the broadest and deepest of all the rivers in India. Right? So that entire area of Assam, if you look at it, there's that orange dot in between around that area, Assam, Guwahati and all those places. The water logging is enormous. It is physically impossible, which is why, very surprisingly, the two dynasties that rule this area, the Gajapati Rajus, not the Gajapati Rajus, sorry, the Gajapatis. I keep confusing it with the minister. Gajapati, and in Assam, the Ahomiyas, they don't go in for cavalry at all. They don't make the mistake of going in for cavalry because they can't. Even if they wanted to, they can't because it's stupid. Right? And what they do is both of them very brilliantly, they come to independently, they come to the same solution. Because remember, these two are divided in between by the Sultanate of Bengal. Now, why was Bengal conquered so rapidly? You see the water table map of India. You see that place in between where that pink patch is, where the two things intersect, where the two crosses, where the two squares intersect. No, where the two squares intersect, here. Baba. Blue, yeah. Here. You see that red patch out there, the red patch, the green patch, and the yellow patch. In spite of all the rivers, the Meghna, the Ganga, and all of that, the Padma, and all of that being there, it is actually much firmer ground than we think it is. Which is why when they say Bengal was conquered with 17 horses, it wasn't. It actually required several hundred, several thousand horses, but that's a different matter. I'm not going to go there. you see Bengal. Can you remove the two squares now, Kushal? Or just say right click them and say push to back.
Where is
No,
it?
just right
I
click the
don't.
squares. Go to the blue square
I
first.
Yeah, I have.
Go to the blue
Yeah, I
square.
have.
Click on that once.
I Okay.
Click.
Nah, it's not.
अरे ये क्या हुआ? अच्छा ठीक है
Nah,
छोड़ो.
it's not.
Fine. Okay. So you look at it. There is a patch of non-waterlogged land in between called Bengal, which is also the Turkic occupied land, which is separating two Hindu dynasties, the Ahomeyas in Assam and the Odiyas in the Gajapatis in Odisha. Independently, these two chaps come to the exact same conclusion that their defenses are going to be riverine. They're mostly boat and infantry based. In a sense, they're mostly like marine troops, but riverine marine troops. And they managed to inflict massive casualty upon casualty on casualty upon invading Turkic armies. Turkic armies managed to get in every now and then. But you look at the total number of times that Odisha and Assam defeat invading troops, be it Tughlaq, be it Khilji, be it Mamluk, be it, those were the main invasions. They defeat them 17, 18, 19, 20 times. In fact, the Konark Sun Temple, again, something I'm infamous for, is built to celebrate the defeat of the Tughlaqs. Tughlaqs or the Khiljis, I forget. It's originally it was built as is, but the iteration you see today was built to celebrate the defeat of the Tughlaqs. So they had a very clear focus on their military thing. They were not, because they could not have the luxury horses on their territory, they did not fight to their disadvantage. They always played to their advantages. So why does Odisha then finally fall? That's a very important lesson to learn. Guess who made Odisha fall? It wasn't the Khiljis and the Tughlaqs. It was actually the Vijayanagar Empire. The Vijayanagar Empire and the Gajapatis were fighting an internecine war, and they fatally weaken each other. The Vijayanagarans weaken Odisha more than anybody else does. And at that point, the resistance becomes weak because you have lost so much troops and money to your wars against the Vijayanagar Empire. You have nothing left now to resist. So even though the riverine defenses, the river forts and things like that, you can still see the remains of a river fort outside Cuttack. I think Cuttack. Outside Cuttack. It is much weakened. There are no troops because remember, even training troops takes 15, 20 years. To build that ethos, to build, the loss of knowledge is enormous. So you've lost wealth to internecine warfare and everything like that. So Odisha is weakened by Vijayanagara. Odisha loses and becomes occupied by the Turks, ultimately by the Mughals, because of its war with the Vijayanagar Empire. The fall of the Vijayanagar Empire at the Battle of Talikota in 1560 something is the best thing that can happen to Odisha, but by this time Odisha is fatally weakened. Even though it managed to resist invasion, it managed to resist some 15 to 20 Mughal Turkic invasions. Simply because the Turkic advantage did not exist, nor were the locals tempted to play to their strengths. It's the exact same thing in Assam. Everybody talks about the Battle of Saraighat. Nobody wants to talk about the battle that happened just before it. I forget the name of the battle now. But there what happened was the Assamese broke ranks and they fell for the classic Mughal tactics. The Mughals feigned a retreat. That's a classic Mongol tactics. That's a classic Turkic tactic. Because like we discussed in video number 1, when you break ranks, you're basically dead. You break the line, you're dead. They break their lines and go out to kill. It's actually what happens at this battle just before the Battle of Saraighat is an exact replay of the Battle of Hastings that we spoke about in the horse video. in 1066, which is where the Norman conquest of England happens. They had spikes and things like that to protect against horses. They broke that, they went out of there, and then the Mughals turned and they slaughtered all of them. And then the Battle of Saraighat happens, where they return to classic riverine marine tactics, which the Turks simply are not able to comprehend. They don't know how to fight in that kind of an environment, and they lose. Incidentally, the same tactics that both the Odiyas and the Assamese used against the Turks are the tactics the Vietnamese used against the Chinese and the Mongols, against both the Ming and the Mongols, right? So it's very interesting tactics that you see happening. Of course, they use it in a sea-based thing. We use it in a river-based thing. So these are all the major wars of why certain things happened in India. Okay. And this is the last in the series, I think, of all of this. So that's where my presentation here ends.
All right, let me stop the presentation here. Okay, I had a few questions first, and then I'll start taking the viewers' questions. I had a couple of queries. So you mentioned initially Indian metallurgy was superior at one point of time. So how come the superior metallurgy did not help us in any way when it came to battles or victories?
Because this is the same reason Nazi Germany lost. German metal was superior. There's lots of speeches of Hitler saying that German man should be like Kruppstahl, Krupp steel, right? The company Krupp, you still get equipment for Krupp. So Kruppstahl. It was just the weapons that were superior. For you to succeed on the battlefield, you need to have superior weapons, you need to have superior tactics, you need to have superior generalship, you need to have a superior plan. If you just have superior weapons, you're not going to win. So every German tank and every German plane was far superior to every single Soviet tank and every single Soviet aircraft. But guess what? It's not Hitler who came to Moscow. It was Stalin who captured Berlin. It's the same thing here. We had superior metallurgy, but when your command is divided, like we discussed in Tarain, when your tactics are bad, like we've discussed again in Tarain, you can't win. It doesn't matter how good your weapons are, they're not going to save you.
So you mentioned another point about a fundamental problem arising out of the difference between cavalry and archery combat. How much of a role did that play in these defeats then?
So archery, like we discussed in the horse video, the thing about archery was you can only poke holes when the line is broken or there is gaps in the line, in the shield wall and things like that, right? So archery never really turns the tide of a battle unless the ranks are broken and indiscipline has set in. If you hold, you can hold out. You can hold out fairly decently. Same with cavalry. It is cavalry and archery victories are because infantry discipline breaks down. By themselves, archery, so the battle, there's these two famous battles that are attributed to the Welsh longbowmen in Europe in the 100 Years' War between Britain and France. The Battle of Crécy and then the Battle of Agincourt. Why did the French get slaughtered at Crécy and Agincourt? Because they never followed the plan. They charged headlong. There was a breakdown of discipline. They charged headlong. And then the Welsh longbowmen who were standing behind the same spikes that were deployed in Assam and in Odisha were able to shoot you at will because you can't break through. You clump up. You offer such a juicy target for these bowmen. They just slaughter you in your thousands. Whereas if you have a shield wall, remember the thing about a shield is the armor is close to your body. So like we discussed with the composite bow in the last session on horses, because we also discussed the composite bow there, an arrow will pierce your armor and it may actually get into your flesh and skin and kill you. But when you're holding a shield in front of you, it may penetrate up to a point, but it gets stuck in the shield. So it will not kill you. Unless there is a gap through which it flies and comes and hits you, it will not kill you. Right, so the breakdown of discipline is extremely important for archery or cavalry to win a victory.
Got it. All right, this thing has stood out for me in today's presentation. Why do Hindus fight each other? Why? I mean, it's. I mean,
This
वो
is
बाहर से
again
आ
a
रहा है और हम
trope.
अपने में लड़ रहे हैं.
Tell me something. I hear this very often. Hindus fight each other. Hindus are so treasonous. Jai Chand, etc., etc., etc. Do you know the Turks were actually fighting each other a lot more? It was the duty, like we discussed in the Turkic invasions, it was what was called a kratocracy. Might is right. It was the duty of the subordinate to kill the sultan and take over power if he felt it was right. Okay, it was the duty of the sultan to blind and kill his brothers to prevent them from taking over the throne. This is how Turkic society functioned in those days. Remember, the Ottoman sultans, right up to Murad, I think in the 1600s, the moment they ascended power, they would have their brothers strangled. Their brothers would be kept in the harem. An executioner would go, and all the brothers would be strangled with a rope. It was the duty to kill your brother. It was the duty to kill your master. That was. So remember, for people saying that Hindus were fighting each other, the Turks were fighting each other even more. The problem was the Hindus were doing it with some kind of duty, oh, I am going to fight and I'm going to fight you. You're another Hindu, but it's an honorable duty. I will not take over your cities. I will not pillage your villages. I will not kill your king. I will maintain honor. For the Turks, it was all about survival. There is no honor in survival. It is to survive. So when I come and take you over, I will kill all of you. I will take over your villages and cities and I will rule you. It's this, and in fact, betrayal was far, far more common amongst the Turks than it was amongst Hindus at this point of time. So this whole narrative that there was a united Muslim front that was attacking India is just complete rubbish. You have to look at the number of revolts and tell me, of the three sultans we discussed, the three big sultans in that entire period, almost 100 year, more than 100-year period, 1192 to 1316-17 we're talking about. Only three sultans were not assassinated. Iltutmish, Balban and Alauddin Khilji. Every other sultan in that list was killed off, deposed, executed, something or the other, poisoned off silently, something or the other. So you tell me, what is this nonsense that Hindus fight amongst each other and Muslims do not?
So basically, it's human universal nature.
Violent. Exactly, it's universal nature, and in fact, in Turkic system, you were rewarded for doing it. So why, the question you should be asking is not why were we fighting each other when they were united. We should be asking ourselves, why was it that we were fighting each other far less than they were, but they were so much more potent than we were in spite of fighting each other incessantly.
Fair enough. Okay, I'm just curious to know, do we have any kind of history of war colleges in India that teach about these kinds of things, let's say planning, stuff like that? Do we have anything of that sort in India?
No, we don't, because I've seen some of the history courses at the military colleges. They never go in depth into these things. They just taught they were won, they were lost. They go by what is written on the victory and the loss. They never go into the micro details of terrain, the economics of horses and things like that, which is why I wanted to do today this 3-part series for you, because basically it was aimed at a lot of the NDC courses which kind of gloss over this part.
All right. Okay, now let us take...
And see, it's still, the reason I wanted to, the other reason I wanted to do it was, this is still the problem, because if your military is still not being taught the macro reasons for why you lost, we go into these tropes. We lost because the Muslims were united and the Hindus were fighting each other. Like we discussed, the Muslims were killing each other at a far, far more alarming rate than Hindu kings were killing each other or betraying each other. Betrayal is the name of the game in Turkic society. At the Battle of Ain Jalut that we're talking about, the Sultan who won, Qutuz, He was killed by his own top general Baibars, who, on the way back, even after being victorious, for the first time in history, somebody has defeated the Mongols so resoundingly. He should have been celebrated as a hero. No, Baibars stabs him in the back and takes over the sultanship. And this is celebrated. This is what you were meant to do. So this is why I was saying, don't confuse Turkic slavery with the transatlantic slave trade. It was not. It was actually Turkic slavery. If you were a Turkic slave, there was a high chance you would become a great official. You could possibly even become the Sultan, number one. Number two, you would become the Sultan if you managed to survive all the intrigue and the inherent violence of that kind of a cratocratic society where murder is justified, where the ends justify the means.
Got it. Okay, let's take the live viewer questions. I'll start from the first one and then we'll go to the new ones. So I think please suggest books on Indian history, especially medieval Indian history. I think we did this last time also. We had recommended Jadunath Shokar or R.C. Majumdar and all those things, right?
And the reason we're doing this is to fill in the gaps, because old history books, they don't go into the macro details. And that's why we've done this 3-part series.
All right, good. So let me see the next question. Okay, so I think this is more about, this is like a cultural question. What is the closest thing we have to literature of war and weapons? Like archery or dhanurdhars had a very high place in our mythology. So where did we lose our way in archery? Somebody has asked.
Oh, very good question. So I suspect we lost our way in archery with the arrival of the composite bow.
Okay.
But it's not just losing our way in archery. See, it's the horse archer combined with the horse. It is the recoil force of the special kind of treatments that were done by the Turks for their composite bow, which gives it a slight advantage, combined with the mobility of the horse. So if you look at how we were discussing in the last thing, this is your shield. The only way of hitting the shield is either from here or from here. You never hit the shield here. And the horse allows you, like when there are two people, one horse archer goes this way, another horse archer goes this way. Two people are shooting at you. You turn your shield to protect yourself against one, and the other guy comes and lances you or hits you. So it's horse plus archer. Because, see, the problem is we have a lot of surviving Turkic bows from this period. We do not have surviving Indian bows from this period. So we don't know, because it is natural at this point that the techniques for making the recurve, the composite bow, or the advanced composite bows have been around for a very long time. We had them as well. India produced composite bows. This latest technology would have almost certainly come in with the Turks. It is the bow plus the horse that makes the potent difference, not one by itself.
Got it. So now let me go to, I think there are two questions that were very similar, so I'll club them together, Abhijit. So somebody has asked, what about war elephants? Are they an asset or liability in ancient and medieval warfare? And somebody rewrote that question as, isn't having elephants better than having horses? What about the elephants then?
No, they're not. I'll tell you why. A horse, if you cover its eyes, it will even jump over a cliff. It's a flight animal. Okay, it runs. It's a way of protection. So you look at a horse, or you look at equises in nature. If you look at an equus, it's that entire family of, say, deer, zebras, wild horses, and all of them. Essentially, a zebra is a wild horse. What is their defense against a lion or a leopard in the savannah or anywhere they are? They run. Okay, so you tell them to run. You cover their eyes and tell them to run. You can run them into a spear. You can run them into fire. You can run them over a cliff and kill them. They won't know. They will just run because they're trained to think this is what we're meant to do. On the other hand, you tell me, have you ever seen a video of a grown elephant ever being killed by a lion or a tiger? Far from it. The lions and tigers run away from the elephant. The elephant is not a flight animal. If you charge an elephant, the elephant will turn around and it will charge you. It will not run away from you. Okay, elephants will, when they're vulnerable as babies, you will see elephant mothers coming and charging lions, tigers. There are lots of it. Go to YouTube and check African savanna, elephant kills lion, or elephant kills, not tiger, obviously. You don't get tigers in savanna, sorry, leopards. They will do that. So understand the fundamental nature of these two animals. So an elephant is a very stubborn animal. It is not a flight animal. It does not have that fear instinct. So if it feels one fine day in the middle of a charge, I don't want to do this, it won't do it. All right. When you say set a horse on fire, its reaction is run away, just keep running. When you see lions come behind a zebra, do you see that even when they have caught on to its hind leg, it is continuing to run? That is what the zebra does. It is trying to run away. So it keeps running. On the other hand, there's that horrible video of people setting an elephant on fire somewhere in Bengal or Assam or things like that. What does it do? It turns around to attack the people attacking it. So the moment an elephant is injured, it searches for the person who has injured it in an attempt to kill it. And invariably, what used to happen was that the moment an elephant got injured, it would turn around and attack its own troops, because it thought anybody around it is the one who has attacked it. And so it was a huge liability. It was a sheer gamble. 50% of the times elephants might succeed, 50% of the times they will fail completely. This was problem number one. Okay. Second issue was to do with visibility. When you're charging as cavalry, the king can hide in the midst of that cavalry. He will not be spotted except by his golden armor or his special helmet or turban or whatever it was. In an elephant, you are literally above the battlefield saying, yo, dude, I'm here. Come kill me. Advertisement sign. Like in school, we used to put this target sign on we used to stick targets on the back of our friends and say, punch me here or kick me here or things like that. It's literally like that. You're essentially making yourself a target where everybody around you can see the entire battlefield, but the entire battlefield can see you. So they know movements when they're happening. So an elephant charge, when an elephant corps is moving, the movement of the entire army is being betrayed. You can't do stealth movements with elephants that you can do with horses. Right? It's very difficult to do that.
Got it. So somebody has asked again, I don't know how historically accurate this is, but I'm going to ask it. Hindu rulers from UP Bihar resisted foreign invasions in early and medieval India like the Mauryas and Guptas. Why was there no big empire when Ghori attacked?
So the Guptas went a very big empire, boss. Remember, when you say big empires, the Kushals were also a proto-Turkic empire, right? But the Kushan legacy in India isn't a terrible one. Whereas the Turkic, as in the Muslim Turkic legacy, is quite a terrible one. So why did they resist? They all resisted. The Guptas, even in their diminished state, resisted. The Mauryas, even in their diminished state, resisted. The issue is, like we discussed, and here you have to go back to part 1 and part 2, it was the nature of society that had changed. The caste had become very rigid out here. The social stratification had become very rigid out here. Your social responses weren't what they should have been. Feudalism had set in, so de-urbanization had set in. So your ability to mobilize resources gets problematic. Feudalism means you're all under different battle commands, which means no unified central command and things like that, like we discussed in the previous 2 episodes and the part of this episode with Tarain.
This actually is a very
big or
good
small
question.
doesn't matter. Like I said, the Gajapatis and the Ahoms were a tiny kingdom. How did they resist so successfully?
Yeah.
Right.
True.
Why is it? Notice, why is it that Odisha seems to resist every wave? Odisha resists the Guptas, Odisha resists the Mauryas, Odisha resists the Khiljis, they resist the Tughlaqs, they resist the Mamluks, they resist everybody. They resist the Bengal Sultanate. In fact, they go capture the Bengal Sultanate and burn its capital. So it's a very different problem set.
All right. So this is actually a good question. What was the impetus for the Mongols to start converting from Tengri to Islam? Was it to establish legitimacy of their reign in the Middle East? It's a good question.
What? Can you repeat the question?
So somebody has written, what was the impetus for the Mongols to start converting to Islam? Was it to establish legitimacy of the reign in the Middle East?
So we don't really know the exact answer to this, except you look at, the proto-Mongol religion is the same as the proto-Turkic religion. It's shamanism, Tangirism. You worship the sky, Tangir. Okay. Even the modern word in Turkish for God is Tanri. Ataturk actually, Kamal Mustafa Ataturk made a decree that you can't refer to Allah, you have to say Tanri every time. Which is God, but Tangir, the Mongol sky god, who was also the Turkic sky god. Now, the thing was, like any religion that is polytheistic, you are syncretic. You adopt everybody's gods. In India, you adopt every single tribal god and say, "Oh, this god is is actually an incarnation of Durga, or this goddess is an incarnation of Lakshmi, or this god is an incarnation of Shiva. It's the local version of Shiva." And then you incorporate that mythology into the Shaivite mythology or into the Vaishnavite mythology. Right? It's like Rome. Rome, Greece, Egypt had a perfectly syncretic relationship where Isis was worshipped as Aphrodite and as Venus. And Romans used to go to Egyptian temples and they used to go to Greek temples. Egyptians used to go to Roman and Greek temples. Greeks used to go to Roman and Egyptian temples and all of that. Polytheism is syncretic. So they'd always say, "Ha, bhai, I will also go to this temple. I will always go to that temple. I will do your religion. I will do your religion." And at some point, when somebody is very open to religion, when the belief factor comes in, the fanaticism comes in. Because remember, polytheism doesn't have that kind of a fanaticism. Some people will be religiously minded, and you will invariably convert to that. So this is what happens to the Turks first. Remember, the Turks were the same as the Mongols. There was no difference. The Turks were Mongols. We call them Turks. The dividing line between a Turk and a Mongol is when a Mongol becomes Muslim, you start referring to him as a Turk. Why do we call Timur a Turco-Mongol? Even that is artificial. He considered himself a Mongol. His neighbors considered him a Turk. He sometimes decided to be a Mongol, sometimes decided to be a Turk, but he had effectively been Turkified. Right? So it was more a case of being open to all religions, getting suckered in by a certain belief system. When your beliefs are fluid and somebody tells you, this is the only way, there is no other way, everything else is wrong. This is like Constantine. Remember, Constantine, even though he was a Christian, he had a great personal faith in his pagan god Sol Invictus. It was towards his death. Constantine converted to Christianity on his deathbed, not during his life, surprisingly enough. Right? So there is this thing where monotheism tends to kind of drag you in, and it's me and nobody else. It's like having many wives, and then suddenly one wife says, all the other wives are fine with it. One wife says, choose me or them. And you love this wife so much, there's no choice left. The other wives have to be gotten rid of. It's exactly like that.
Oh, got it. Okay, somebody has asked, infantry use wooden staves, spears, and caltrops against cavalry for defense. What tactics would be used by attacking infantry against cavalry defending itself?
Sorry, Kushal, you were breaking up there very badly. I could hear you.
So I'll repeat the question. Infantry use wooden staves, spears, and caltrops against cavalry for defense. What tactics would be used by attacking infantry against cavalry defending itself?
Well, infantry as a rule did not attack cavalry. That's the thing. Because cavalry would then run. The point of a horse is the horse is always much faster than the human being. So you see a human wave coming at you, unless you're trapped against a hill or something like that, or with a river to your back, you run. That is what you do, right? So you never. So it's generally, like we've discussed, if it's a formed line of infantry attacking cavalry, there's almost nothing that cavalry can actually do. Because like we discussed with horses being flight animals, if you're starting to attack or intimidate it from the front, it'll then turn around from the opposite direction of the attack and run. Unlike an elephant that will attack you from the direction of the attack. Right? So you didn't really protect, and besides, infantry was never quick enough to take on cavalry.
Got it. Okay. So there are many questions, so we'll go through them very fast. So why did the Indian forces trained by Frenchmen get defeated by the British? Maratha, Sikhs and Mysore had troops trained by the French.
Where specifically? I mean, I know there are one or two battles, but those were just exceptions to the rule. They went the rule. 99% of the time, it was the British doing the defeating. It was just occasional defeats here and there. And that's because the French and the Brits were kind of evenly matched. And remember, Britain was way ahead. You're looking at the 1700s, when the Industrial Revolution was in its absolute advanced stages in Britain, the Cold Revolution. All right, so Britain was actually way ahead of France at this point. And remember, in Fort William in Calcutta, at this point, 1757-ish, they had stocked up over 1 million rifles. The rest of India did not have 1 million rifles, but one British fort, Fort St. William, had 1 million rifles. One. And they had stocked up equal quantities of cannon and gunpowder in every single one of their forts. It was the sheer numbers and sophistication of the British. That was the Industrial Revolution happening. So wherever the Marathas won victories against the British, there are few and far between. It isn't a consistent pattern. Please remember that.
Got it. All right. So somebody's asked, why did Krishna Deva Raya never move towards the north and capture Delhi?
I don't know.
All right. Fair enough. I didn't know about this. So this is a good question. How is the horse culture so prevalent even till Western Europe? Where were French and English getting their horses from? Didn't they face the same problem as us with horse breeding over multiple generations? So I'll just state, you have to watch part 1 and part 2 to understand the answer to this question, where the entire terrain of different parts of the world are explained in the presentation by Abhijit. So I'm reading this question out is because a lot of people hop onto part 3, so they don't know there's part 1 and part 2, but I purposely read this question out. If you read part 1, go through part 1 and part 2, you will have the answers for this question.
Yeah.
All right. So somebody
just
has
to quickly answer, because we didn't. Britain and France have a lot of open grassy land. Not much, but enough to sustain local horses. Equal to each other, yes, they have enough. Britain and France, when facing against each other, have enough land for horses to sustain each other, because they're wide open plains. And in the case of France, apparently a lot of it was created by the Romans. The Romans came and chopped down so many forests and groves and things like that, that they say, I don't know, they say that much of the barren lands that you see in France, well, they're lush green, but without trees, is because of the Romans. So thank you to the Romans for the French. With Britain, they anyway had lots of open lands because of, cold winds and things. Nothing can grow. Saplings are rooted by the wind even before they have an opportunity to grow.
Okay. So somebody has said your presentation is amazing, but they feel that could you have added something like the resistance argument, considering the changing borders of the Delhi Sultanate, which was effectively pretty much going down to Punjab and the Ganga area? Do you think there was a scope for the resistance argument?
What is the resistance argument?
I have no clue. I'm just reading the question.
I don't have a clue either. But remember, I take all these maps of the Delhi Sultanate with a huge pinch of salt. Remember, not one sultanate They all lasted for periods between 70 to 80 years. They did not have centralized rule. They were extremely fragmented. Mostly they would go conquer a part and then say, you keep paying me tribute and things like that. Feudal empires by their fundamental nature. So you will see a map of the Khilji Empire showing the Khilji Empire all the way from the Khalji Sultanate, all the way from Kashmir right up to Kanyakumari, because Khilji goes and sacks the Madurai, Malik Kafur goes and sacks Madurai.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Complete rubbish. It was a raid. A raid is not a conquest. Remember that.
Mm-hmm.
They went back after that. So take these things with a pinch of salt. When you see map, the concept of permanent control over an area, don't accept it in a feudal kingdom, in a feudal period. The actual period, the actual reign, the centralized rule of that area is, like you said, very small. It would have been around the Punjab area, around Delhi, parts of UP and Haryana, and that would be it. The rest would be a feudatory network where they were obliged to send troops and taxes. That's it.
All right. Okay, so can you please explain why caste ossification, weakening of the army, and maybe the ingraining of ahimsa, which is pacifism, set around at the same time, which is 500 to 400 BC, coinciding with the advent of Jainism, Buddhism? I don't agree with this. In fact, caste
It is
ossification,
not. Caste ossification
yeah,
happens 1,000 years later, 580, not
yeah,
BC.
it does not. Yeah, it does not happen then. Yes, I was just gonna, but it was important to
It's a-
read the question and then dismiss it because it is just factually inaccurate.
Right. Caste ossification is a post-Gupta phenomenon.
Yes.
Why it happens, we don't know. But what we do know, for example, there's Fa Hin and Huan Sang, the two Chinese travelers. The one who comes during the Gupta period just mentions caste as nothing particularly important. But I think it's Huan Sang who comes during the period of Harsha in 700 AD. And he mentions that it's become a complete caste madhouse, to an extent that it is not mentioned in primary accounts from the previous period, A. B, we have genetic evidence now. We have genetic evidence showing you that endogamy sets in around 500 AD.
Mm-hmm.
Why this is happening, we still do not know. Let me repeat, we do not know why it's happening. We know it's happening.
Yeah, everybody has a educated guess as far as we know. It's all educated guesses. All right. So this is interesting. When fighting, did the Hindu kings see a difference between the Turks and Hindu kings, or were they just another opposition to be fought off? I think this is, again, this would be in the realm of making guesses, but I want to know what you think.
No, they did not, because we have no actual definition that we see in all the Turkish accounts and the Persian accounts that we see. They had a clear definition of who is us and who is not us. So what Huntington describes as substance and salience. Substance, what connects us; salience, what separates us. All the Turks have a very clear definition of who is not a Turk and who is not a Muslim. The Hindu kings do not have that, which is why, like we discussed, the Vijayanagar Empire, the biggest casualty of the Vijayanagar Empire was not the four Deccan sultanates. It was actually the Odia Gajapati kingdom. Because as far as the Vijayanagarites were considered, the Gajapati kingdom was as bad or even worse than the Deccan sultanates. So they certainly didn't see the difference. But here's the funny thing. The Deccan sultanates also did not see that difference. Remember, those four sultanates were fighting each other like cats and dogs. What does in Vijayanagar is the fact that its last ruler, Devaraya, is so completely, not Krishna Devaraya, another chap called Devaraya, is so diplomatically incompetent that he destroys 200-300 years of Vijayanagar foreign policy, which was to divide and rule. He succeeds in uniting them that they themselves never thought of uniting. Till this man is so diplomatically incompetent, he succeeds in uniting them. He essentially, Devaraya does what Hitler did to the Allies.
Got it. All right. This is a very interesting question.
Capitalist West hated communist Soviet Union, but because Hitler is the biggest enemy, we'll both ally and screw you over.
Got it. All right. This is a very interesting question. Upper Maharashtra also has a similar topography and water table as Odisha and Assam. Can this be attributed to later
Sorry,
Maratha victories?
what?
Maharashtra.
Huh.
So they
So
say
you look at if you actually go to the topographic map, I want to show you something.
Okay, let me open it again and share
Go
the
to the
screen
last
again.
two maps of the presentation.
Yeah. I'll share it again. This will be interesting. So let me share it. Okay, let's see. Yeah. So this would be Upper Maharashtra here, right?
Right. So if you drag that blue circle, are you able to edit in that? I think you should be able to edit.
No, the editing can only happen if I'm not in the present. Yeah. If it has to be in the presentation.
So you look at right. So you look at southern Gujarat and upper Maharashtra, the coastal area. You see that the water logging is very similar to what you see in Odisha, right?
Yeah.
But I want you to now go to the topographic map.
Okay, wait. Let me go to the topography.
Which is the previous map.
Yeah.
आ गया?
हाँ, आ गया.
Right. Now here what you see is that the water logging is literally on the rainward side of this thing, of the coast. So that's what the northern, what coast is that called? Is that the northern Konkan coast?
Konkan,
na? So that's the northern Konkan coast. You see that that patch of land is actually extremely narrow.
This bit.
It actually never came, that bit, if you move from north to south, that dark patched bit, that was never under the permanent control except the coastal areas. And that is why the Portuguese and the British and the Ottomans were able to set up base out there, because it was so well protected from all the northern. You look at where Surat is in southern Gujarat. You look at where all the original Portuguese and the Portuguese and British settlements are. They're all on this coast. Right. So what happens is this is actually protected. It is protected. It gives the defender the advantage against the invader. And that is why Europeans were able to settle there almost as early as, see, the Europeans came and started settling there in the 1400s. Right? By the 1400s, the Europeans, the Portuguese Empire controlled the states of Hormuz for 120 years. People don't know this. But what is today modern day UAE, the tip of UAE and Oman, and the Hormuz, Iran, was a Portuguese colony. Similarly here. So it protected it. It was never under long-term Muslim occupation. They would come in, just like, in Odisha, they would come in, carry out raids, mostly successful, sometimes unsuccessful, mostly because here there was no organized resistance out here, unlike in Odisha and Assam. The lack of organized resistance was another issue, because remember, the Solanki and other power centers were deep inside Gujarat. They went that far south.
Got it. Okay, I'll stop the screen share now. So somebody has asked, what about Bangladesh? Does that come into this entire picture at all?
Yes.
The area that is
Bangladesh come
Bangladesh.
into the entire picture. Actually, if you go to the water table map of India.
Okay.
Sorry, again, you'll have to bring up to this thing. Unfortunately, because it's India and they're so finicky, this is a government map. And because the government is so finicky about the unity and integrity of India and the borders of India, you have to, they left out Bangladesh completely. But Bangladesh is not an extension of the Odisha pattern of water holding. It is actually an extension of the Bengal pattern of water holding, which is, you can see, that's between 5 to 10 meters or 10 to 20 meters. You have to dig quite deep for groundwater out there, surprisingly.
So it's basically this pattern over here, this one.
Exactly. It's that pattern over here that gets replicated to that white patch, that white hollow that you see on the further east. Yeah. So, this is where even a flight can be quite illustrative, because when you fly over Odisha, you will see that the entire area looks inundated. But when you come to Bengal and start flying to Bangladesh, flying over Bangladesh, you realize that it's only the rivers that are inundated. The rest is not. The rest is actually solid land. And that has a lot to do with mangroves creating those forests. Like, the Sundarbans, it accumulates, it creates artificial islands that are extremely solid and things like that. So it's a completely different ecosystem. But remember, Bengal was heavily forested. Assam developed way before Bengal did, because Bengal is entirely the making of the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughals, who started chopping up large parts of the forest and going in there and clearing out land and making it arable.
Got it. All right, next question is, how much of truth is there in the story of Suhail Dev defeating and killing the Ghaznavide general Ghazi Mia at Bharej in 1034 CE?
Highly likely, and I'll tell you why. Because we know for a fact that the Ghaznavis were suffering frequent defeats. Why is it that their borders stabilized around Lahore? Okay, why were they not coming in more and more? But remember, at this point of time, Ghazni's, the Ghaznavid Empire, not Mahmud Ghazni, but the Ghaznavid Empire's focus was more on the north and the east, because they were facing Turkic invasions from the north, and they were facing further Turkic fights in the, not the east, the west, sorry, on the Turkish border. They were in a constant state of war with these people, with the Seljuks.
Got it. Okay, let me read the next question. All right, somebody, this is more like a question, and we've already answered this. Somebody saying, my only problem is, in the face of foreign invasion, our kingdoms didn't unite, or is it something of a distorted history which is being taught in school? We've already covered this, so I don't think so we need to refer to this again. Now the next question is, Chalukyas, Pratiharas and Karakotas were successful in repulsing Umayyad invasions from 780 to 860 AD. What contributed to these victories?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? What? Slowly, please, slowly.
Okay. Chalukyas, Pratiharas and Karakotas were successful in repulsing Umayyad invasions from 700 to 860 AD. What contributed to these victories?
These were at best minor victories. Remember, they didn't come east of the Sindh. They stopped in the Sindh, in fact, for a reason. There is the Thar Desert to cross. The people who came to India had been cut off. The Abbasid revolution was already happening out there, which cut off Persia. Remember, the Abbasid revolution, if you look at it, is technically the main Turkic revolt. It was on the backs of Turks that the Abbasids gained the empire away from the Umayyads. So there was a cutting off of Iran from the Umayyad whole that happened. So it wasn't actually much to do with India at this point of time. It had a lot more to do with internal Muslim Abbasid versus Umayyad politics at that time.
Got it.
Because we never hear about, because we don't have a documentation of the big battles.
Okay, this is a good question, Abhijit. I really like this one. So somebody said, if this waterlogging and mountain tactic stands true to deter cavalry, why were the Hindu kings at around Indus and Hindu Kush able to defend themselves?
Sorry, repeat. Why were the
Hindu kings around Indus and the Hindu Kush successful in defending themselves?
They were not.
Why were they not? Oh, so I'm sorry, they were not. So I guess they made a typo. Why were they not?
Why were they not successful in defending themselves? Well, first of all, you're on the invasion route. You have none of the advantages. You're probably stuck to this cavalry is hierarchy argument, and therefore I have to be seen on cavalry and I have to be seen on this and that, which is why that entire part from Kabul, from the Turk Shahi kings to the Hindu Shahi kings to Lahore, they start falling like 9 pins, and they actually, Lahore has been colonized by the Turks for a much longer time than we think. Lahore was almost certainly visited by Genghis Khan at one point of time. Lahore was part of the Ghaznavid Empire. So ever since 1000 and whenever, it's been part of the Ghaznavid Empire. We suspect, first of all, because of the ferocity of attacks out there, number one, because that is invasion central. Number two, you will be dependent. It is not a land that can sustain much, where Lahore can, but further up north, where the Hindu Shahis were in Kabul and things like that, it cannot. You depend on a lot of the factors. Your localized cavalry would have been less. All kinds of things where you simply could not. That's the way it is. Borderlands are like that. Borderlands follow a different, borderlands tend to defy conventional logic. You have to go battle to battle. There's very few macros that you can apply to borderlands for a variety of reasons. I mean, you look at the Roman Parthian borderlands, or the Roman or the Byzantine Sassanid borderlands, or the Roman German borderlands. They're highly problematic. They keep shifting here, there, here, there, here, there.
All right. So somebody has asked, how did the Marathas then take control over Odisha and Bengal with their cavalry alone? How did they manage that?
They did not manage with cavalry alone. So this is a very important part that you need to know. It was not completely cavalry. There were heavy infantry involved in there. And remember, Maratha rule over Odisha was light touch, unlike Bengal, where Marathas have a very bad name, because it was called the Maratha ditch. Everybody was in fear of their lives because of the Marathas, not just the Muslims, the Hindus as well, remember. Odisha was not. I think you really need to go study the history of Odisha, where, Maratha rule in Odisha was extremely light touch. It was distant. It was not in your face, and it involved a few set-piece battles here and there, unlike Bengal, which felt the full force of the Maratha invasions. Okay, and second, it was not. Cavalry was used heavily because the Marathas invested in cavalry, but they were mostly infantry. The raids were carried out by cavalry, but the infantry would always come and back up and sustain.
Okay. So I'm going to take a few questions which are about the subject, and then maybe I'll come back to some other subjects. So what were our unique fighting units in our armory in the last 1,000 years?
Nothing realistically.
Okay.
There's no unique fighting unit. And it's a good question, because, every ethnicity seems to have a unique unit. I think the only unique unit would be elephants, but then we've discussed elephants.
Got it. All right. Somebody has asked, why did you not cover the Kamarupa Varman dynasty of Assam? Is there a specific reason?
No, I just did. I mean, I'm not covering dynasties. I'm covering wars.
Got it.
Okay. So I'm covering wars and tactics. I'm not covering your favorite dynasty or your favorite king.
All right. By the way, the person who asked this question, that handle's name is Rana Ayub. Okay. So somebody has asked, Abhijit, China has a 9-generation rule for treason. Did India have anything like that at any point of time?
No, so that's collective punishment. That's like the sip and half clause. It's not 9 generations, it's 9 degrees, where your friends, your friends' friends, your aunt and uncle and their friends, if you committed treason, all these circles up to, it wasn't 9, I think it was 10 circles would be executed. In India, it was hit and miss. It depended on the king. There was no set rule for this, no.
All right. So this is something to mention about what you've mentioned in the Q&A. If substance and salience have always been a Hindu problem, what is the solution? Hinduism does have unique features to make it a well-defined religion. I don't think so. Substance and salience is a uniquely Hindu problem. It is a problem with any plural system, and it's always going to be there, right?
It's always going to be there. Why is it that, why is it that every pagan religion has this problem? The Romans had this problem, and look, you think of it as a problem now when you're confronted with monotheism. In the ancient world, it wasn't a problem at all. Like, the Roman legions adopted Mitra. I am a priest of Mitra, hence Abhijit Iyer Mitra, who was the god of their arch enemy. So they were fighting the Persians, but they adopted a Persian god as the god of the legions. They intermarried a lot with the Persians. See, that contempt for your enemy, that dehumanization of the enemy does not happen in that period. You fight the Greeks, but then you marry the Greeks, you adopt their culture, and that's why it becomes Greco-Roman culture. A lot of the roots of Greek architecture actually lie in Egyptian architecture. When you go and study architecture, you'll understand that. A lot of the roots of Greek architecture also lie in Persian architecture when you go and study, which again lies in Assyrian architecture. When you go deep into it, you will understand that. So in those days, identity was a completely different issue. Identity as we know it today, the solidification of you, me, and this thing, it comes about mostly because of monotheism. Monotheism brings in a completely different way of looking at identity.
All right. So why did Indian kings never attack or invade Tibet like they attacked Afghan areas? And why did anyone else except the Cholas occupy Southeast Asia?
Sorry, you're breaking up, Kushal.
Okay. Why did Indian kings never attack or invade Tibet? Like, for
One by one.
example,
Let's answer.
Yeah. So why did they not?
Tibet, yeah. Okay. So Tibet, first of all, several issues. It didn't make any sense for them to go uphill and attack Tibet. Because remember, for the Chinese to attack, there's a gentle gradient from China to Tibet, which you can negotiate from the north. For India, it is all uphill. There were too many passes and things where you could be ambushed, number one. Number two, when you are such a agriculturally rich country in a period where agriculture determines your wealth, what would you go and capture a desert plateau for? Okay, you just don't do that. It didn't make sense, and it was a logistical nightmare, so it was just not worth the effort. It was that simple.
All right. Okay. The second half was also pretty similar, because why did no one except the Cholas occupy Southeast Asia? I think this pretty much covers the same thing.
But everybody accepts that the Cholas occupied Southeast Asia. It was a trade war which became a full-blown war. It had to do with the rights of Chora merchants to trade in the Indonesian archipelago, and they go in there and they smash the Srivijaya kingdom to do it, and they put it under Chora occupation for a while, and the Chora merchants get all their rights back. So it was a classic American conquest of Hawaii. It was almost literally like the American conquest of Hawaii.
All right. Okay. This question, I don't know about this one. I'm not sure. So somebody has said, Abhijit sir, Nizam Shahi sultans had Hindu origins, as I have read. So how were Persian and Turkic nobility loyal to them?
I don't know the specifics you're talking about, but like I said, when you say Persian, first of all, there is no such thing as Persian. They've been Turkified heavily. You need to go to Persia to realize that. Persians get very upset when you say that, but that is the truth. They're heavily Turkified. But like we discussed before, there was no such thing as loyalty at that point of time. Please do not conflate modern ideas of loyalty. These people were killing and betraying each other left, right, and center. There was no social taboo against killing your brother or your father or your child for the sake of power. Power was everything.
Got it. Okay, I think this is such a straightforward question. I mean, even I can answer this. How can you explain why Indian Muslims have Arab names, more Arab names, and try to imitate that culture than comparison to, say, Turkic culture or other, Mughals were also ethnically.
in the information age, there's been a homogenization of a certain interpretation of Islam where everybody tries to be Arab. But that's only been happening in the last 15, 20 years since the internet came about. Before that, there was none of this aping of Arab culture out here, but there wasn't an aping of Turkic culture either. Indian Muslim culture was a very uniquely Indian Muslim culture. Just like Persian Muslim culture was not Arab aping, it was a very uniquely Persian Muslim culture. And Turkic Muslim culture was a very uniquely Turkic Muslim culture. Tell me, when did the Turks ever ape Arabs? When did the Persians ever ape Arabs? When did the Arabs ever ape anybody else? When did Indians ever ape either of these people? They did not. They did not. So it was completely different. What you're talking about is a phenomenon that we're only seeing in the last 15 to 20 years.
Yeah. Unfortunately, people don't get a historical perspective, which is a problem. This is a modern question. I've not read the book, so I don't know. So in his book, Major General Bakshi talks about RMAs, which is cavalry, gunpowder, air power, integrated systems, and AI integrated systems. What will be the next RMA? I have no clue. Okay.
Revolution military affairs he's talking about, but I disagree with this classification completely.
Okay.
I disagree with this classification. Cavalry was never an RMA, huh? Cavalry was never an RMA. Even gunpowder, the RMA, the associated RMA, the Revolution Military Affairs with gunpowder, is when that French king, I think his name is Henry, invades Italy in the early 1400s, where he mates gunpowder to horse-driven carts. And forts start falling one after the other to him. And it's a very short-lasted RMA, because RMAs only last on average 12 to 20 years, because then a counter comes up. Okay. And in the case of that counter, it was a star fort, which was built to, I think we discussed that in episode 2, star forts, which was, they came up specifically to counter the threat of gunpowder. Mobile artillery, technically. So, I disagree with this definition of RMA to begin with, but I don't know where it's going.
Yeah. So, okay, somebody has requested you to do a series on the Kottayottu wars. I think these are the wars he's talking about, the Kottayottu war, right? The fought between Kottayam King, Padasi Raja Kerala Varma, right? That one, right?
I'm not going to do that, and I'll tell you why. I don't get into micro details of military history. I do macro history. Okay? The whole problem here is that when you get into micro, you lose mistake the trees for the woods, or the woods for the trees. I forget what the analogy is. Okay, I only do macro. I study battles as far as it helps me understand bigger patterns. I don't get into that. I suggest you find somebody else to do that for you, or read up Wikipedia if you must.
Yeah. All right. So I'll ask 2-3 questions and we'll wrap it up now. What else? Let me see, because I want to keep. So how did the Sikhs manage to invade Afghanistan, Kashmir? So did the Mughals and British invaded Odisha, Assam, and Afghanistan. I think we've answered this. I'm just repeating the question, so that, because we've already answered this. Now there are some. Why were we always outnumbered in battlefield with the West? Was caste any angle? Also, did morality or rules of engagement play a role in our defeats?
Sorry, what? Repeat the question slowly.
So I'll ask. Okay, why were we outnumbered in the battlefield with the West? What was the role?
We were never outnumbered. We always outnumbered them.
Yeah.
We had too much quantity. That was our problem. We never thought outside the box, because we always thought we would overwhelm them with numbers. We always outnumbered every single army we came up against when we lost.
Yep. All right. So how would India prepare? So somebody has asked this question. This is a contemporary question, but I'll ask it. I don't know what it has to do. So how would India do in a two-front war today? Can we take on China and Pakistan?
I'm not answering this question. This isn't the subject of this series.
Yeah, that's why I don't want to ask this
Please, no
question.
generic questions. Ask me specifically
Mm.
with regards to the Turkic to the medieval period, please. This isn't
Yeah,
some
so
general view of world military history.
yeah, I think we've covered everything now. All the questions regarding this one have been covered completely. I guess, yeah. So, Abhijit, we can wrap it up.
Yep.
Before we wrap it up, you have any other last comments to make?
No, just that there may be a fourth part to this if you chaps ask really interesting questions. So do that, and maybe, because when you guys challenge me and ask me questions, it helps me contextualize things and it helps me think better. So, for example, I had never thought of explaining war horses till a lot of the comments showed me that clearly there was a lot of misunderstanding about war horses. Similarly, with Odisha and Assam, this started off because of Mongols, Odisha and Assam, and I had to use Tarain as a segue for it. Most of it came from the comments. So when you keep commenting on the videos, what happens is I pick up things that I feel that I have not explained to you properly or in depth to you, and then I go into them in depth.
Got it. So you've heard Abhijit, guys. Stick to specific questions which are about this series. The series was about Turkic invasions. So I mean, if you're gonna ask contemporary questions, I look, when I do this podcast, it has to be about this series and this very subject. So there were regular questions about World War II. I can't take World War II questions. This is about Turkic invasions, so stick to Turkic invasions. You want to do a separate series? Maybe you can tweet at Abhijit, and we will do it later on or some other time. But this is about the Turkic invasion. So we'll end the podcast today. And as always, Abhijit, buddy, thanks for coming.
Sorry, you broke up.
I said Tata.
Oh, tata. Or as we say in Turkish and in Afghan, tashikur.
All right, guys, time to wrap today's discussion up. Thanks a lot for all your questions. I have literally taken almost every question you guys have asked, which was related to today's discussion. If you like what I'm doing over here, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, like the video, share it, and share all the three. 1, 2, 3. If you're watching 3 right now, you'll not get a lot of things. So watch 1, then 2, then 3. Bolo.
Just remember, number 2 isn't marked Turkic Invasions Part 2. It just says the War Horse. But I'm sure when Kushal uploads it, he will link this. Are you allowed to relabel videos?
I've already made it Part 2.
Okay, good. So then it says Part 2. Yeah.
Yeah. So all the 3 videos are called Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. All right, guys, please support the podcast. Become a member on YouTube or subscribe on Patreon, or send your donations to UPI or buy the Cārvāka podcast merch. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, namaste. Take care.